Date point. 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, 5th day. AV. Firebird, classified. Orbiting Cimbrean. The far reaches. Riley Jackson. That's the last one. Copy that, Editor. Riley allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Deploying a series of satellites into Cimbrean's orbit had been a tedious job, but made vastly easier by jump technology. No need for a dangerous and expensive rocket launch. The SAT could go straight from the lab to orbiting an alien world in a moment. It wasn't quite a free launch, but considering how cheap power was becoming as Earth deployed more and more solar collection fields to replace traditional power plants, it was the next best thing. The result was that there were a lot of them, many whipped up in universities and colleges by their doctorate students, running on Raspberry Pi or reprogrammed last-generation cell phones. Between those, plus the NASA, CERN and other professional offerings, there was a lot to do. O'Reilly and all the other TS pilots were back to being glorified space truckers. The deployment of ChickSat-1, an offering from MIT designed to use laser interferometry to map Cimbrean's ocean floors, marked the end of the deployment operation, and thus the moment when Odyssey and Edda became available to escort Caledonia on her return voyage. Hey, Captain. Semenza sounded like he had something on his mind. What's up, Joe? Take a look at the continent below us. That's where Fulcra is on our right, yeah? Riley turned to get a good look, rolling Firebird a little to help. Yeah, hey, is that supposed to be there? Glad you can see it too, Semenza commented. Clear as day, cutting across most of the width of the continent, was a crescent line of brown. It's visible from space, it must be huge, she said. Hey, Edda 2, Firebird Actual here. Can you give me ice on the ground over the Fulcra subcontinent? You guys see a discoloration? Stand by, yeah. Some kind of brown scar right through the forest. You reckon it's important? Riley rolled Firebird back over so that her belly was facing dirt side. Joe, get some pictures. Send them down to the colony, she ordered. Wilco. Firebird's heritage included spy planes, and given that such equipment took up only a tiny portion of her comparatively large airframe and mass allowance, an advanced suite of cameras and sensors had been found a place in her underbelly. Give me 10 degrees left roll, he requested, followed by, perfect, hold it there. Okay, got it. Myrmidon, Firebird 2, I have recon data for groundside. Lost it to check. The wounded destroyer was in a higher orbit, nearly half a light second out, but there was an unobstructed line of sight between her and Firebird. On the smaller ship's dorsal hull, barely a meter behind Joe Semenza's head, a tiny ball rolled in its socket, exposing an infrared laser lens and matching camera to space, but they aimed themselves towards the larger vessel's RFID. The system was only good at comparatively close ranges, but allowed for huge bandwidth data transfer. Copy, Firebird, establishing LOSIR connection. Connection's good, clear to send. Sending. Sent. Forward to groundside mark for civilian science, please. Data received in Wilco, Firebird. Myrmidon out. Okay, what's Caledonia's ZTD? Riley asked. 37 mics. Caps at 76%. Okay, coming to orbital rest. Deploy the witches. Aye aye. The wide attainment charging energy system always made her think that Firebird was perfectly named. The two generators for the system were mounted just forward of the thrusters and thrust out sideways. At first they were invisible, but as they stretched out to their full width and caught the solar wind, they started to grow a vivid aurora crimson, shading to orange at the edges and tips. Happy that her baby was getting well fed and would be at maximum capacity when the time came to depart, she relaxed back in her flight seat and looked outwards towards the stars. There was a blinking star out there, which was impossible in space, but she knew what it was, even before a quick check of the nav radar confirmed it. It was half a hunter ship, tumbling in its orbit where she and Semza had killed it. Smiling to herself, she gave the dead aliens the finger. Life, she reflected, was good. Date point. 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, 5th day, AV. The Scrap Heap Sea, Cimbrean, the far reaches. Ava Rios. Ava had to admit, her boyfriend looked good naked. Colony policy was that exercise was mandatory. While there had been some grumbling over the authoritarian nature of that edict, it largely faded in the face of a long and comprehensive introduction to the effects that low gravity had on the human body. A good part of their loan finances had been spent building a large vertical gravity gymnasium fit to handle even the most aggressive population growth estimates for the next 5 years, staffed with trainers tasked with keeping the colony in shape, and establishing a requirement of a minimum of 2 hours of intensive physical training per week. Adam took 5 2-hour sessions a week in the 1.1G room, plus a half-hour warm-up and cool-down on either side in 1G. The result was that her skinny boyfriend was rapidly becoming her otter-fit, toned and gorgeous boyfriend. It made the thought that she was living with him a difficult one. Ava was a not-before-marriage type in principle. She promised as much to her parents, and especially wasn't about to break that promise now that they were in heaven. But they lived together, unsupervised, and the whole colony gave the impression that they would have been surprised and a little put out to learn that she and he weren't having sex. As far as she was concerned, however, much they'd been through together, 16 was still too young. She didn't care if Fulva had inherited Britain's very European laws in that area, but it felt wrong to her. It wasn't that she didn't want to, but lots of things had felt wrong to her lately. The whole world had turned out to be wrong in so many ways that every day had become a temptation to just let go and go with it. But here they were. The air was cool, the water was crystal clear, and apparently surprisingly warm, and they had barely arrived before Sarah had vanished into it in a skinny, flesh-toned blur, leaving her clothes on the beach, followed equally shamelessly by her little brother and 2 of their school friends. It was all so weird, especially when Adam just met her gaze, laughed sheepishly, shrugged, and pulled his own shirt over his head. Guilty or not, she'd had to admire his body, as he had shed his jeans and run into the water, laughing nervously. She tried to follow them, she really had. She tried to let go like she said she would. But every time she tried to will her hands to a t-shirt or a jeans waistband, they clenched into fists and retreated, on a tide of nausea. It was so stupid. She knew it. She knew it on a deep and visceral level, that the problem was all her own making. She could see right there in the water the evidence that she was being ridiculous. But still she lingered on the bank, hugging her knees and quietly going desperate and neurotic from the absurd shame that she was the only one wearing clothes. Eventually she couldn't take it anymore. She stood up and slipped away into the woods. It was quiet back there, somewhere she could get some alone time and process her feelings. On a whim, she plucked a shoot from a nearby bush, stuck it in her mouth, and, after a moment to take note of where she was, strolled deeper into the sunlit glades and wooded halls of an alien forest. Date point: 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, 5th day, AV. HMS Caledonia, approaching the Garai system. Captain Rajesh Bathini. Signal from the lead patrol vessel, Captain. Translates to, unidentified vessel, you are approaching the sovereign territory of the clans of Gao. You will halt before crossing the border or be met with deadly force. Comply immediately. Bathini nodded, the picture of calm, as he settled his cup of tea back in his saucer. All stop. Aye aye, all stop. All stop, the helmsman repeated, obeying instantly. There was no visible change in the outside view. They had already dropped from the huge apparent velocities of interstellar travel to a much slower, much noisier approach that the Gaui military couldn't possibly have failed to notice. The stars had not visibly been moving for nearly 10 minutes now. As they dropped to a sublight velocity, the most that anybody inside Caledonia's bridge could detect was a faint lurch. From the outside, as the Gauian vessels came to a halt around them, the deceleration was so much more visibly violent. It wasn't so much that the ships arrived as that they appeared, their incomprehensible speed, a term that wasn't really applicable to the way that warp drives worked, but sufficed in the absence of an alternative, only hinted at by an eye-blink's worth of motion blur before the ships were just there, solid and drifting, as if they had never been anywhere else. He admired their tactics. While it clearly betrayed that they were ignorant of Caledonia's blink-jump tactics, the configuration was excellent. Placing all 3 ships in a position so that, no matter which vector Caledonia might accelerate along, a minimum of 2 of the Gauian craft would have a firing solution on her, and one that made sure that no allied craft was in danger of being hit by stray fire. An unlikely event when you were talking about distances of hundreds of kilometers, but still a sensible precaution. Odyssey and Edda are both stopped at a rendezvous point 2 parsecs out, and are on a hair-trigger to jump in via wormhole if summoned. While Caledonia's own systems were only on about 60% charge, needing only 5% to effect an immediate retreat to Cimbrean, theirs would be fully charged by now, primed and ready to fight as hard as humanly possible in the event that it became necessary. Bathini was resolved that under no circumstances would it be necessary. The very last thing they needed now was to disgruntle a potential ally. Best behavior, people. I don't want to peep of activity out of anything that might even smell like a weapon on their sensors, he said. Signal from the lee ship, Captain. It reads, identify yourselves. I've wanted to say this for a long time, he confided, standing up. On screen. Date point. 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, 5th day, AV. The Scar, Cimbrean, the Far Reaches. Dr. Mary Cleveland. Dr. Mary Cleveland had come to Cimbrean for the simple reason that it opened up a hitherto unexplored field of science. Xenomycology, the study of alien fungi, or at least of alien lifeforms that were functionally very similar to fungi. Persuading her husband Colin to join her and become the human race's first xenobacteriologist in the field had been as simple as suggesting it. Both of them were of course trained in the proper use of protective clothing to isolate themselves from their samples, but she had only imagined ever to need it in the lab to prevent contamination of the sample. Protecting herself from a potential threat had never really been considered before. This was supposed to be a Class 4 planet. That had been before they saw the mark up close. What had looked like a thin brown line in the satellite photo had turned out to be a comprehension-defining large swathe of forest. From the shuttle, it stretched horizon to horizon in one direction, and filled half the world below in the other, flanked with sickly yellows, whites and blacks. The brown was death. Trees had fallen, and nothing was growing to replace them. Streams were choked with scum and froth. They circled over one obsessuous hole in the forest, where even the fallen trees were gone, and inside it, Mary could see the skeleton of some native beast the size of a horse, and already it looked incomplete. This shuttle sensors are next to useless, the pilot reported, but it's good for atmospheric composition. Have a look at this. The scientists crowded round, leaving poor Mary stuck in the back, too short to see the display. Hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, methane, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, putrescine. Bloody hell, now I'm glad we're wearing the suits, somebody commented. Must smell like shit out there. Lovely, the pilot muttered. Guess I'm in for a treat when that ramp comes down. Is there anywhere to set down upwind of the area? Close enough. You mind walking a half mile or so? The consensus was that they didn't, so the shuttle spun down to drop its passengers off on a rock that lunged up from among the trees, forming the point of a gentle slope down into the forest. Aside from a slightly intimidating dash down the ramp onto solid ground, it was an easy walk. Down among the foliage, the damage was alarming. They were a good kilometre ahead of the apparent border of the damage that was visible from the air, but it was immediately obvious that the true leading edge of this landscape-eating sickness was far ahead of the yellowing and death. Every surface of every living thing was squalid with wet orange and off-white spots. The light filtering through the canopy borrowed a wretched hue from the infection, leaving the whole science team feeling filthy even inside their suits. Bacterial growths, Colin? Colin nodded, rubbing a leaf between two gloved fingers. It disintegrated. They could well be. Grab a sample, I'll try and culture them back at Falther. Those, on the other hand, Mary said, as the man with the sample bag produced a sterile tube and swab, and set about collecting samples, are definitely fungal. She was referring to a mat of white fibers that had completely overrun one limb of a nearby tree. Don't go near that, Dr. Stevenson warned her, as she started to approach. When she turned and looked to him for an explanation, he dug a rock out of the soil and threw it at the branch. It cracked, and a quarter-ton of wood sagged on the tree before crashing down. Everyone on the team carefully stepped away from any overhanging limbs. Samples gathered, they pressed onwards. With each tree, things seemed to get worse, but none of them were quite prepared for the abrupt change. There was practically a line on the ground where living but infected plants gave way to dead, decomposing wreckage. In fact, there was a line. A meandering one as wide as a human forearm was long, and the colour of pus. Samples were gathered from that, and from either side of it, and the air was captured for later analysis. A stream, presumably one bubbling and pretty, but now more closely resembling the contents of a sewer, was likewise sampled, as was the putrefying carcass of another horse-sized animal. Past that point, the damage almost seemed to play in a perverse kind of reverse. It wasn't that there was anything alive and healthy beyond the wave edge of the disease, but the ground stopped slipping and squelching underfoot. The air became less heavy with spores and foulness. Eventually, they reached the denuded heart of the scar, and found only bare soil, already starting to form a channel where the nightly rains were washing it away. They sampled everything. Finally, as the sun was starting to set, they regrouped, and the important question was asked. Well? Mary looked around, at the rot, at the destruction, at the death, and at the river which was carrying the foulness who knew how far away. Well, so much for Cimbrean, she said. Date point. 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, 5th day, AV. Cimbrean, the far reaches. Ava Rios. Ava! The cold light of flashlight between the trees, the sound of her voice she loved on the edge of fear. It should have bothered her. Ava! An older voice, a deep one. She loved him too. She loved everyone, but especially Adam and Gabriel. Over here. Oh, hey, Sarah. Ava, what's up? The expression of worry on her face was kind of funny. Her own low and happy laughter sounded creepy even to Ava herself, and that just made her laugh more. Oh, I'm great, I'm fine, she promised. This didn't seem to reassure Sarah, which made her laugh again. Crackling and snapping in the bushes, more cold on natural light. Adam, baby, you want to get married? What? Ava, are you drunk? Didn't drink nothing, no sir, she giggled. More like hey. Gabriel, daddy, hee hee. She sang the word as it turned into another giggle. I'm so lucky, 2 daddies in 1 lifetime. I'm a lucky girl. She didn't understand the strange glances they exchanged. That was funny, but she was already giggling, so there wasn't room for more. Come on, Ava, let's get you back to Folfa. Come on, let's go swimming again. I didn't get to earlier. Look, I brought my swimsuit. For Christ's sake, girl, put that back on. Take it off, put it on, make up your mind. Dad, I'll handle her. You better figure out what did this. Oh, no handle, Adam. She didn't really fight him. She was too tired. Date point. 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, 5th day, AV. HMS Caledonia, near the Garai system. Captain Rajesh Mathini. Galleon really did sound very much like Chinese. Not in the specific sounds, but in the general cadence and flow of the language, the way it sounded to a native English speaker's ear. Having KItten on the bridge to take over the negotiations had proven to be the right choice. For all their supposed positive attitude towards humanity, it had been known for years that Galleon politics was completely fractured, and unless you were speaking to a female, you had no direct line to anything resembling a unified government. Evidently, there were factions within the military who regarded the Deathworlders as a serious threat, even in the face of the most overt peaceful overtures that Mathini could muster. Not so different from home then, really. If the Galleon language reminded him of the Chinese, then so too did their commander's attitude. Fleetmaster, he interjected, using the title that the translator and KItten both had given. It was my understanding that our species have, so far in these past short years, enjoyed a good relationship. I don't see why I would want to break that trust now, nor why, or even how we would do so like this. It is thanks to your species that hunter attacks on our outposts and shipping have increased. The snow-muzzled, aging fleetmaster snapped at him. I am tasked with safeguarding my people from all threats, and collaboration with your species seems to me to be a certain invitation to further retribution for those monsters. We are going to have to do something about that bad image, Mathini thought to himself, as he picked his next words carefully. The hunters have failed against the humans almost every time, KItten said, before Mathini could finish assembling a sentence. If your motive is fear, old father, then these here are the species to be more afraid of. He showed his teeth, which was apparently not a friendly gesture in Galleon body language. Not to mention the ones less likely to eat you, he added. Trying to intimidate me on their behalf, pup? The fleetmaster snarled, but he didn't fool Mathini. KItten had scored a hit. Even the old Galleon wasn't quite wily enough to hide it. Am I? I don't find facts very intimidating, white snout, KItten retorted, calmly matching the insult with one of his own. How dare! The fleetmaster began to object. KItten actually leapt forward and made a furious yipping noise towards his senior's projection. Senile! Blind! He snapped. So afraid of today that he'll quiver under a rock to save his hide and let cubs die tomorrow. Mathini leaned forward to whisper in his Galleon's pointed ear. KItten, are you sure this is... he began, but he could see glances in the background behind the fleetmaster. As abruptly as it had begun, the conversation ended, as the furious father cut the link. The tension of the ensuing pause lasted 2 whole cups of tea, before finally a hail from the lead Galleon ship came through. This time the figure on screen was a different galleon, obviously junior to the Fleet Master, but not by much. Of the Fleet Master himself, there was no sign. "Caledonia, you have permission to enter the Garai system under our escort," he declared. "Do not deviate from your assigned path or power your weapons or shields." Bethini raised an eyebrow at KItten, who, any in body language be damned, was obviously feeling very pleased with himself. "We understand and obey," he replied calmly. "Thank you." Date point: 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, 6th day, AV. Fall for colony, Cimbrean, the far reaches. Gabriel Ares. "Okay, thanks for coming. We're sorry for the short notice of this thing, but this is important." Gabriel Ares stood up and held up the unadorned aluminium rod that marked him as the speaker for now. Both it and the silver shield badge of the Colonial Police on his jacket shone in the blue morning sunlight. "First, as you've all probably heard, I can confirm that one of the children was evacuated back to Earth last night with a case of poisoning," he began. "We've just received word from Scotch Creek that she's made a full recovery, or they plan on keeping her under observation for safety's sake over the next couple of days. She should be returning with the next group of colonists." There was a general relieved sigh and some muttering. Ava was popular, especially among the regulars at the Faith Center. Concern had been flickering around Fulford like lightning in a mountain storm all morning. Gabriel held up the speaker stick a little higher to quiet them down. "We've identified the plant that poisoned her. Cimbrina Simscamelia delani, the Cimbrean tea plant. The young shoots seem to have a potent drug effect when chewed raw. We need to know if anybody else has been using these plants recreationally." Chatter erupted, and Gabriel banged his walking stick down a few times to restore silence. "I want to make it perfectly clear that nobody is in trouble," he raised his voice. "The matter of whether or not we should be treating that tea as an illegal neurotic is a subject for a future thing, but for now we need to know if anybody's been using it to get high, so we can make sure they've not harmed their liver function or anything." After a little more chatter, a handful of people stepped forward. The Tisdales, he was unsurprised to note, were among them. "Right, sorry folks, but you're all going back to Earth for a day or two. We don't have the facilities here to properly test or treat you. Haley, Mark, your kids can go with you, or they can sleep around my place." The thing cleared up rapidly after that. The Tisdales agreed to let Sarah and Jack stay with Gabriel. There were a few questions which Gabriel definitely put off until next time, before finally retiring to let the colony finish discussing it on their own while he retired to his office. In privacy, he ran his hands through his hair and swore softly. It was still hard to believe that Ava, of all people, had been so stupid. He was beginning to doubt his own parenting decisions. Date point: 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, 2nd day, AV. The Grand Conclave, Hunter Space. Alpha of the Brood That Builds. The Alpha of the Brood That Builds could feel its maw watering. To be a hunter was the hunt. The need for it was programmed into their genetic essence, playing even a critical role in their reproduction. A hunter was only fertile within the few days after a successful hunt, at which point, if so ordered by its alpha, it might go into a reproductive trance and willingly enter the spawning pools. There, its own young would devour it from within. Small and agile little swimmers with little to their name, but sharp teeth would burst in a bloody froth on the disintegrating corpse of their parent, leaving only clean bones and cybernetics to sink to the bottom of the pool. Over the coming months, live prey slaves would periodically be thrown in, to be ripped apart in a feeding frenzy by the increasingly mature hunter young, until they were finally developed enough to haul themselves out of the pool and be escorted away to receive their first implants and join the ranks, to have knowledge and skills force-fed into their brains via cybernetic data shunts, joining the brood of their parent. The exception were the brood that builds. Where our normal hunter's eyes were solid black or red, those of the brood that builds were identifiable from the moment they clambered from the spawning waters by their green eyes with the distinctive zigzag pupils. They held themselves slightly differently. The cranes were that little bit larger, their natural claws absent, their endoskeletal structure that little bit better suited for heavy lifting and carrying them for combat. They were the largest brood by dint of being swelled by the breeding of every other brood, as well as their own spawnings, but to the brood that builds, a successful hunt was something very different. To them, an engineer's obsession with problem-solving was as natural as breath and feeding. In their instincts, prey was an outstanding unresolved technical challenge, and the hunt was the solution to that challenge. To the brood that builds, installing an ingenious sewerage system was on par with raiding a prey freighter. Deploying an orbiting array of energy collectors within millimeter tolerances was rewarded with an ecstasy that other hunters could only find in the flesh of humans. And now this. The prey of a lifetime. Actual sensor records of a human starship in action, fighting in ways that defied immediate comprehension. A quarry without compare. The Alpha knew that if it succeeded at this task, it would have to spawn afterwards. The urge would be far too powerful. The pheromones and hormones of its deadly birthing would produce strong hunters, the finest minds ever seen by the brood that builds. It relished and anticipated the thought. The Alpha of Alphas was in an indulgent mood, but there were limits. Impatience, demand. Can you learn their secrets? It demanded. Confidence, gratitude. The Alpha of Alphas has given me a fine prey to chase. But whatever solution the primitive Deathworld beast can invent, I can invent also. These secrets will be yours, the Alpha builder replied. Query. And how long would it take to introduce this technology to our brood vessels? Thoughtful estimation. That would depend on the nature of the technology and how much of the swarm would be thus outfitted. Clarification. The entire swarm of swarms. Every last ship. This technology allows the Deathworlders to slip their cage and turn it into a wall against us. We will now devote all of our efforts into penetrating their fortress and butchering every last one. Surprise. Timid objection. Greatest one, even if the secret turns out to be trivial, that will take years. Anger. Your place is not to object, your place is to obey. The Alpha builder cowered as the Alpha of Alphas rose from his Voss's skull throne and spread its cybernetic claws. Placation, obedience. It shall be as the Alpha of Alpha commands, it mentally squeaked. Satisfaction. Good. Get to work. The Alpha of Alphas paused as the Alpha builder scurried away. Fret. Understand something. Alpha of the brood that builds. It fixed the lesser Alpha with a stern glare from all 7 of his eyes. If you reproduce before every last human has been devoured, then I shall personally filter your spawn from their paw and have them fed to the spawn of another. The Alpha builder swallowed, a subconscious gesture that, unbeknownst to either species, exactly mirrored his meaning in humans. Fearful understanding, it sent, and scurried away. Suddenly, this new prey seemed so much less exciting to it. Date point. 4th year. 8th month. 3rd week. AV. Austin, Texas. United States of America. Earth. Kevin Jenkins. Hey, is, Moira home? The man in the door looked him up and down. If your name's Kevin, he decided, she ain't. Kevin sighed and nodded gently. It is, yeah. Anger flashed in the other man's eyes. In that case, pal, your restraining order... I've got this, baby. Moira kissed the man in the door on the cheek, and after a quick check to make sure she was certain, he retreated inside. Moira leaned on the doorframe. He's right. That restraining order ain't gone away, she said. I know. Why are you here, Kevin? I thought you were going to leave us in peace. I was hoping maybe I could try and unfuck up one thing, Kevin said. What? You're here to apologize? Kevin shook his head. You and I both know there's not enough sorry in the world, Moira. I cheated on you, I beat you, and The sentence trailed off. Even now, in the act of cleansing himself, he couldn't bear to repeat what he'd done to Callie. You're fucking right you did, she snarled, advancing out of the house. She's upstairs. God willing, even if she looks out, she won't remember who you are. How dare you come here? I'm not staying, he reassured. I can't apologize to you, Moira, but I have to apologize to her. You're not seeing her? No. I didn't think I would, so... I've got this letter. You read it. You decide whether to give it to her. You can burn it if you want, but I can't leave without at least trying. Leave? She asked suspiciously, snatching the letter from his hand. You came back just to leave again? Earth. I'm leaving Earth. Forever. Date point. 4th year. 8th month. 3rd week. AV. Fault for Conley. Cimbrean. The Far Reaches. Dr. Mary Cleveland. Peptostraphoscus magnus? That's definitely E. coli, no two ways about it. And yep, I bet my life on it. That's Enterococcus facium. Well, that clinches it. Governor Sani was no scientist, but he was a highly educated, highly literate man. Faecium, as in feces, he said. Oh yes. These are all Terran species of bacteria, every one of them native to the human gastrointestinal tract, Dr. Cleveland said, still examining the images being produced by the electron microscope. As are the fungi we recovered, his wife added. Colin nodded. Aside from the scale, it's a pretty classic cross-section of the kind of flora you'd find in an ordinary, healthy bowel movement. Sandy grimaced and pinched his nose. Delaney, he said. Must be. The scar describes pretty much perfectly the direct route from the site of her escape pod to here, if we assume one can't break a day or so. Even one would have done it, Mary said. You can't blame her, Governor. I don't, he reassured her. Is there anything we can do? Mary sighed. I suspect something like this would have eventually happened anyway, she said. In the absence of any bacteriivores or immune systems capable of keeping them in check, the bacteria and fungi are feasting and reproducing as fast as they possibly can. Deathworld microbes, loose in an ecosystem that simply can't cope. This was never not going to happen, from the moment a human first landed here. Sir Jeremy listened to her patiently. I thought the disease suppression implants, he said. Those rid us of a whole raft of communicable diseases based on the case of one human who managed to infect a whole ship full of Vistigix. They're actually targeted at a fairly short list of bugs. Colin shook his head. They ignore our gut microbiome by design. If they completely sterilise the human digestive tract, it'd probably kill us. So Jeremy made an exasperating noise. Bloody, sloppy, half-baked alien solutions, he cursed. Very well. Is there any way we can stop this thing? Wendy shook her head and gave him the hard truth. Almost certainly not, now that it's so advanced, she said, apologetically. I'm sorry, Sir Jeremy, but if our noble goals towards conserving the ecology of this planet were doomed before we even got here. Shit. Coming from a man who was not known to swear, this prompted a round of sympathetic nodding. Sir Jeremy had been passionate from the word go about preserving Cimbrean's native life, and certainly nobody in the colony disagreed with him on that endeavour. He wiped away a futile tear. Fine. Is there anything we can do? Colin and Mary exchanged glances. The death of a whole planetary biosphere isn't exactly our field, Colin demurred. Is it anybody's? I suppose not, Colin frowned, thinking. The knock-on consequences are total, Mary said. No plants means no oxygen. So we're on borrowed time now before Cimbrean ceases to be an inhabitable planet. Good husband that he was, Colin was on the same wavelength instantly, and if there's nothing we can do to stop them from dying, then the only option is to replace them. And the only readily available plants which could survive in soil contaminated with Terran microorganisms would be, well, Terran ones, Wendy finished. You're proposing an ecosystem transplant? That sounds like an impossibly large task. Vast, Colin agreed, but it's either that or abandon this planet and watch it die. We need to bring in everything, Mary said. Trees, grass, bushes, bees, birds, insects, rodents, birds, fungi, algae, fish. Everything. All the way up to apex predators. Impossible, surely, Sir Jeremy protested. Replacing the ecosystem of an entire planet, that's far too large a task. But we don't need to replace it across the whole planet at first, Colin pointed out. If the aliens are right about Deathworld species, and the evidence of this bacterial event suggests that they are, Mary nodded. Then we only need to introduce the immigrant species along the length of the scar. It might even help to contain the infection and slow it, if we introduce things in the right order. Colin nodded. Of course, the Terran species would ultimately outcompete and supplant the natives, but if we're lucky, a few mutant strains might make it through the mass extinction events, and we still have a few Cimbrean natives for posterity. Is that feasible? The Clevelands looked at each other, back to him, and simultaneously they shrugged. We're not remotely qualified to plan more than a tiny part of that process, Mary said. It's the precise opposite of what I came to Cimbrean to achieve, Sir Jeremy objected, though it was at best a defeated token objection, rather than a serious dissent. She's already terminally ill, Colin replied. She either becomes barren and uninhabitable, or we terraform her. Those are the only options I can see. He glanced at Mary, who nodded her agreement. So Jeremy sat down, took off his glasses and cleaned them on his tie. Is this likely to happen wherever we go? He asked. Well, Colin cleared his throat. His expression confirmed that the answer was an affirmative, and that he really didn't want to say it. Wendy finished for him. "They do call us Deathworlders," she said, and pointed at Firebird's image of the scar, as the governor put his glasses back on. "Well, there's the proof."